the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer, someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer, baseball in the summer.
BrockvMac Legendary Rivals videocast, and we are doing a Mac cast today with Trevor Lawson, who it seems has some localized roots to the Hamilton area, so McMaster may end up being his home turf, but one of the original Marauders, so this should provide us with some really cool background information on the very launch of the program. Trevor, how are you? And after 25 or 30 years for a lot of guys, what are you up to these days?
I'm great, Mike, and thanks for hosting all this, by the way. It's been fantastic and fun and sometimes sad, but wonderful all at the same time to watch all of the podcasts you've done so far. So these days, I'm living in Toronto. I've been practicing as a lawyer for 25 years now, and I live here with my wife and one of my sons now. My older son has moved away to finish high school in the U.S., so our house is a little quieter right now. But yeah, we just living our lives and keeping busy.
Did you have a ticker tape parade when that happened, or was the confetti flying?
Yeah. Well, it's he's away, but he's not really away. Sometimes there's more work having a son living away than having him in the house. But we've gone down to see him a couple of times, and I'll go down to see him once more before he comes home for the summer.
Yeah, whereabouts is he going to school?
So he's going to school. He's playing baseball at an academy in Lexington, South Carolina, just out of Columbia, called the P27 Academy. So this is his last year of high school, and for the first time ever, he gets to play a real high school season against some really good competition from Virginia down through Florida. So he left in the fall, and he'll be back just after the May long weekend.
Well, I may know of a coach at a certain Division I school in Virginia named Michael McRae that we'll have to get your son on the radar too, because he likes Canadians, and Coach McRae is something else.
Yeah, he's actually committed to go to the University of Florida this fall. So,
oh my goodness,
he's already locked a commitment down.
Well, now I know why you're a lawyer. It's obvious that you took your legal certification to become an agent. So that's a really good choice. I don't know how you thought of that in advance, but Trevor, what kind of law do you practice in?
I do labor and employment. So I act for companies primarily in relation to unionized employees. So collective bargaining, labor arbitrations, labor board hearings, human rights proceedings, things of that nature.
Well, we will really dive deep into that, because that doesn't seem to be a natural path coming out of McMaster, mostly McGill and some U of T and these kinds of places. Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see how you ended up there. But before we jump into the wonderful world of living in Toronto, and I'm also in Toronto, so we probably go jogging by each other or some such thing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and where did you develop a love for sports, and was baseball part of that mix or something you grew into?
Yeah, so I probably one of the few people you've been interviewing who actually grew up in Hamilton. I grew from the time I was born until the time I was in grade 10. I actually lived just a stone's throw from McMaster University on Broadway Avenue. which as the neighborhood aged, more and more students moved in, which caused my parents to decide they didn't want to live in the midst of a student ghetto, and we moved to Dundas, which is just below McMaster University. So I finished high school in West Hamilton, and then attended McMaster when I graduated from Westdale High School. So that area, that neighborhood, was very well known to me before I went to McMaster. I grew up playing hockey and baseball, and back then, unlike now, you played one sport and then put it away and then rolled into the next and then repeated it the next season. And where I played baseball was also in the neighborhood at a park called Alexander Park, which also happened to be where the McMaster team held, I think, its very first tryout that I attended, at least. And then as I got older, I played junior baseball and senior baseball in Dundas for the Dundas Chiefs as a senior team. And a few of the MAC guys you may have interviewed also had some time in that program as well.
Oh, it's interesting kind of going to your hometown school, and especially having some insight into how students carried on, and the student ghetto can be an interesting place to observe behavior. But was it always, were you thinking you were always going to go to MAC, or were there other choices that were part of your
there was
thought
other
process?
options. Yeah, most of my friends, as it happened, moved away to go to school, most to Queens or Western. And for me, staying home and going to McMaster just made sense from a family perspective, financially, etc. I would have probably taken on a fair amount of debt if I had gone to McMaster or to Queens or Western, like most of my other friends. So I decided that I would stay home and go to MAC, and had a good program. So I was happy with that decision ultimately. And then once the baseball program got underway, which was toward the end of my time at MAC, it actually got much better to be a student who was from Hamilton going to McMaster.
Yeah, amazing. So Trevor, let's go back a little bit from the dawn of the baseball team at McMaster. When did you start playing organized baseball? Was that something did you play in high school, or was this something you picked up at an early age?
Yeah, it right from t-ball. I played. I think I started in t-ball when I was 4 or 5 years old. Played again at this park, Alexander Park, close to where I lived, close to the university, and played in that organization growing up until I started playing with Dundas as I got a bit older. Continued to play senior baseball, I think, until I was 28 or so. And then by then I had moved to Toronto, and it was just getting really tough to sneak out of work. As a first-year associate, trying to sneak out of work to meet up with my teammates in Dundas, and then drive to St. Catharines to be on the field for BP before the game, and then drive back and make it home by about midnight to get back to work the next day. So I decided at that point that it was probably time to hang it up and just focus on work. It wasn't easy because all of my best friends were the people I met and played alongside of in baseball. And it just seemed like that was the right time to do it. But in hindsight, I wish I had figured out a way to keep it going, maybe joined up with a team in Toronto. But I got into focusing more on work, and I've eventually found my way back to baseball through coaching and being a board member of our local organization, and just carting my sons to their games now.
Yeah, that's. I don't need to ask the next question, which was going to be, do you miss it? So
yeah,
let's.
You know what, and it's kind of that situation where when you stop doing something, you set it aside and you get focused on other things. In my case, work and having kids and raising them from a young age, you don't really realize how important it was in your life. But then as my older son got to an age where he was interested in starting to play, then I started to, just through playing catch with him or rolling ground balls or just being around him getting interested in the game, it just brought it all back. And, now with both sons playing, all our family vacations, all our holidays are really built around, going to their tournaments and watching their games. And and coaching in the case of my younger son up until this season. So it came back with a force once my kids started to get into it. And I realized, that's where I started to think, I really wish I hadn't hung it up when I was 28, and I would have figured out a way to still do this when I was in a better state of mind and fitness to do it as I wanted to.
Well, we all get to throw on a uniform one more time just so we can show our kids that we're a bad facsimile of what we were 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Trevor, what position did you play, and did you have any coaches when you were, getting a little bit older, but as a young man that were big influences on you?
Yeah, I played third base growing up, and until I actually got to senior baseball and McMaster. And for McMaster, I played shortstop. And in senior baseball, I moved over from third base to shortstop for the last few years that I played as well. But I always felt more natural as a corner infielder than in the middle. And in terms of coaching, it all seems kind of innocent now when you compare it to the way baseball programs are structured here, with professional coaches, many of whom played D1 or were drafted and played in the minor leagues, or in some cases in the major leagues. Most of the coaches I had from a young age were parent coaches who had some background in baseball, but it all seemed much more instinctive and natural in terms of development, and not as structured and and as computerized as it seems now. I'm just going to let my dog out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay. My apologies.
No, it's all good. You've got an audience cheering you on.
Yeah. So in terms of coaches, I mean, from the earliest coach I had was a guy named Joe Cheeseman. His son was on the team as well. He was a firefighter in Hamilton. Great guy. Just not as much for maybe the sort of raw baseball skills that he instilled, but just more from a team perspective. Everybody on the team was important. Everybody got a chance to play. We were always a team. We won as a team. We lost as a team. And that's something that, was instilled in me at a pretty young age, and really never forgot that as I got older and got into some more serious, more high-level baseball than the community baseball I played as a kid.
No, it's an important thing. I've said it on a couple of other podcasts where some very high level players, played that, diversity of sports during the year. Wayne Gretzky was a prime example of a guy who played baseball and hockey, and says he wouldn't have been as great a hockey player if he would have been playing year round, because different muscle memory, different reactions, your reflexes are tested differently by different types of sports and stuff. So I think that probably benefited a lot of people, and I think the hyper focus leads to a lot of burnout and a lot of, while very functional players and very fundamentally sound players, maybe not as, you're right, instincts maybe are a little bit of a sacrifice there. To kind of revisit do you remember what program did you take at McMaster when you decided I'm gonna, darken the halls of my local university here?
So I started in the business program, and as it turns out, math is not my favorite thing. So I quickly pivoted to political science. And because the electives I was taking were actually the only courses I was doing well in. So once I pivoted to a program that better fit sort of the way I think and the things that interest me, I did very well and enjoyed being at McMaster a lot more. And, political science being what it is, it's not exactly the kind of program where you can go open a poli-sci retail store when you're done. And so the logical next step for me and half my classmates who sat in the LSAT with me when I was at McMaster was to go to law school. And that's where I ended up going after I left McMaster.
Yeah. Did you have a passion for law, or it just seemed like a career that had some upside? There are certain faculties within universities that make, and I don't mean this to sound demeaning, but they absolutely make no sense to me in terms of a practical career other than working at a university. I remember taking a philosophy elective and thinking, they were teaching us to postulate, and they were teaching us, how to think things through. But I thought to myself, what type of job do you get after you take philosophy? You can only work in the philosophy department at a university. It's the only place where philosophers work.
Right.
And I'm sure you were having these same kinds of feelings about political science because, it's unless you're going to become a journalist and maybe comment on it, it doesn't seem to have a clear career path, right?
Yeah, law seems to be the most direct path for many of the people who are in the program I was in, and many friends of mine who ended up going to law school. But it wasn't something I was actually thinking of. I wish I could say I was a more clear thinker about my future and where I wanted to end up. But I was really at the time, if I'm looking back on it, just kind of going with it and going with a course or a selection of courses where I was enjoying myself, which, as it turns out, if you like what you do, it can lead to good things instead of torturing yourself and trying to be something you're not. So it actually worked out well. And it was a very natural path. I'd always been interested in politics as well. So when I was finishing up my poli-sci program, the two options I was considering was to go do a master's degree at the American University in Washington, D.C., because I'd always had an interest in U.S. politics, or to go to law school. And as it turned out, I think law school was the better choice because just about everything else in my life has been set in motion by the decision not only to go to law school, but to go to law school at Dalhousie University in Halifax, which is where I ended up after McMaster.
All right, we will definitely talk a little East Coast. You're like a reverse Craig Cooper,
Yeah, that's right. I was probably past one another on the highway.
So let me ask you this: what's life like? The social aspect of going to your hometown university is interesting because you would have had friends that you probably went to high school with who are still in town, and you're making new friends at the school and in your faculty. And tell me a little bit about what social life was like, in your university experience, and is that it's something all of us wouldn't take back because it's one of the main things that we learn at school is how to function within a group of people. But tell me a little bit about the social aspects of going to your hometown university.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I had a number of friends who left Hamilton to go to university. So there was times when I would, leave for the weekend and go see them at their universities rather than stick around Hamilton. And I did have some friends who ended up going to McMaster with me. So there was that element of carryover from high school. And I actually had some friends who decided to take a victory lap and were doing grade 14 in high school to finish up, who were still around. So, so I had that sort of carryover friend group. But it was actually, this is where the baseball program was actually great because it's not as easy for an off-campus local student to meet friends on campus because you're not living in residence and you don't get a house and live off campus and do all those things people do when they move away to go to school. So that experience was a bit lacking for me, going to McMaster. And, when the baseball program got underway, even though it was late in the time I was there, I really actually enjoyed having the opportunity to meet people who had a common interest and who I enjoyed being around. And, we did things socially as well as part of that. So it was great, not only from a baseball perspective, but to have that opportunity to meet a lot of guys who I probably wouldn't have otherwise met or hung out with at Mac.
Well, never mind start some early billable hours by getting Bill Newton out of the drunk tank over and over again.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the parties with the residents that he and his cousin and their cadre of Niagara Falls folks lived in was quickly party central once the baseball team came together.
Yeah, Billy was a teammate of mine in Niagara Falls, so I know all about Mr. Newton's love of a good time. So tell me, how did you find out about the baseball program? Because, it's very clubby in the beginning. I think they played one exhibition game in 1993. And then in 94, there was an actual team that the one you played on.
Yeah.
How did you find out about it?
I have no recollection of how I came to know about that team. My first real memory of it is showing up to this Alexander Park, which is not far from the university, on a really cold day. And there is just a bunch of guys who were there trying out for the team. And there was Jason Gwindon with a clipboard assessing everybody. And I went out and took my little showcase routine of ground balls at shortstop, like everybody else. And he seemed to like the way that went and offered me a spot on the team. And I was happy to take it because, my summer baseball season, like most, ended OBAs on Labor Day weekend. And it feels like too soon, when you're just getting through the season. And the fall is great to play baseball in, at least up until Thanksgiving time. And it was really nice to have the opportunity to continue a season and to play for your university.
So here's a really good question. Were you guys in 94, were you having to wear the blue uniforms still, or had they converted to the maroon ones yet?
It was the blue. Yeah. We were wearing the blue jerseys with gray pants.
Just an unbelievable thought process.
I wouldn't have wanted to wear those. Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to wear those blue jerseys in the summer. They were pretty heavy, which wasn't a bad thing in the fall, but they were not overly breathable.
No, and tell me a little bit about your thoughts on Jason. I mean, you make the team, and obviously you're going to get to know Jason a little bit more, and probably one of the few folks who'll have some crystal clear memories of what Jason was all about. And we've touched before that, it's amazing that the founder of a program undergoes such a freak accident a couple of years after he launches it. But tell me a little bit about the person, Jason Gwindon, and kind of what he was like as a guy that was running a program at that point, and his relationship with you.
Yeah, I recall thinking at the time, and still thinking now, that it's pretty remarkable that a student, not someone older, not someone in administration, had this vision of something that just didn't exist at the time, and to create this program and made connections with, at the time it was just Guelph, us, Durham College, and McGill, and just started this thing from nothing and just built the momentum so quickly to where it became, so many more universities getting involved and jumping on board within just a couple of years after its inception. He was somebody who was really passionate about baseball, and they always say about people who pass, and those who pass prematurely in particular, at least they pass doing something they love. And as you, I think, would probably know through some of your other podcasts, Jason was on a tour going to ballparks when the accident occurred, as I understand it. And that kind of passion to go and just see baseball and be a part of it is something that I certainly felt when he was getting the program underway. And all that being said, he was really serious about it too. We were, goofing off or not taking it as seriously as he did, then he would let you know that as well. And so I'm not sure I was expecting some of the rigor that he brought to the program, being someone who wasn't that much older than me, if at all, at the time. But he was probably one of the more serious and strict coaches that I ever had that season, which seemed kind of funny. But I appreciated it, because he was taking it seriously because he wanted it to be a serious thing and not a diversion and not something that people took lightly. And I think that's how he carried himself when he was on the ball field.
Yeah, no, it's hard because you're under a microscope from the administration too. So I'm sure that he felt the pressure backwards, which is the athletic director and other people are watching you to see whether you're something more than just, the pogo stick club or, whatever else is going on at the school.
Right.
And it comes with a certain standard. You have to exceed the standard, oddly enough, of the other varsity sports for them to take you seriously, which is not a fair bar. At the end of the day, it should be equal for everybody. But I think we're all, especially those at McMaster, understand that, there's a bit of a pecking order there in terms of how they treat their sports. So you have football and then you've got the basketball teams and, baseball they were going to force baseball to really adhere to some self-imposed standard that really doesn't exist. But very interesting. What do you recall of the games? And I guess at that time your main rival would have been the Durham College Lords and Sam Dempster.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, there just seems to be a bit of antagonism, maybe because you guys were the initial rivals and didn't see McGill all that often. They're off in Quebec, and you play them, but it's not the same as knowing that Sam with that swagger and Durham College rolling in with the bus and the 30 players. So tell me a little bit about your memories of some of the games you played during the season.
Yeah, Durham College at the time seemed like a Power 5 D1 program with all the gear they had, the bus. You're right, the bus they rolled in on. I mean, compared to us certainly, and even McGill and Guelph, they seemed to be a much more advanced program from the get-go. I actually had a teammate who played with me on the Dundas Chiefs who was also on that team, so we had a bit more of a even direct friendly rivalry between us when we played those games. And they were always intense. Right up until the semifinals, I recall us, I don't think we had beaten them all year, but in the semifinals, we knocked them out to face McGill in the final. Oh. And that did not go over well with their players and their coaching staff, and it was a bit of shock to them, and probably a bit of a shock to us as well that it happened. But yeah, they were always good games, and as I kind of mentioned, after I stopped playing, I didn't really even follow baseball, so I didn't really see where the league evolved or where Durham evolved, and after I kind of left it all behind. But I assume that they had such a good program from the start that they maintain that for years after.
They were always really well funded because they were a full-blown varsity team that was not doing fundraising. The college paid for it, and the athletic director there, a guy named Ken Babcock, really instrumental in getting college and university baseball off the ground. And he had this vision of colleges and universities playing together. The issue with that is, in time, the colleges couldn't remain competitive because they generally would have athletes for 2 years on most college programs, 3 at most. And at some of the schools that had graduate programs like McMaster, Scott Hughes from your team played for 10 years, like 10 years of, I ran the league for a year in 1996. And we wanted to put eligibility limits in because Laval and McGill also had players that were playing 5 and 6 and 7 years. So it is kind of not really a fair battle when you get a 26-year-old ex-pro pitcher in there against a 19-year-old true freshman or an 18-year-old true freshman. And so eligibility was something that they needed to fix, and they didn't really fix it for about 10 years. So right around the time one of your McMaster players, I think, got in a lovely 10-year career in SEBA for 2 schools. And I think even Doug Lunny may have played 5 or 6 years, like the long tenures of going to school. So I think it just was non-competitive for the colleges ultimately. And they've now since moved into a Canadian colleges championship and don't compete with the universities anymore. So, Trevor, tell me a little bit about some of the friends and relationships you would have picked up on the team, because, we all bond with our teammates, and you've got some classics on that 94 team. And, we all talk about Billy Newton and his boisterous ways, but there's other players, and any that stand out as people you particularly bonded with.
Billy's Billy, and he's kind of he's glue wherever he goes. He brings people together, and certainly played that role, as you've heard from others on our team as well. Joey Davis played in that first year with me as well. We had known one another from playing against each other growing up. He was a great guy, great teammate, master jersey while we were playing.
Yeah, that's it. You guys would strike me as someone who's coming from the outside and is really a character-laden bunch. Good, solid citizens who are pretty understated generally. They don't have any. You got some cartoon characters, but I think in general, really good people. So, tell me about the trip to Montreal for nationals, because this just sounds like either the most incredible journey or a moving road violation, given that there were 20 people to a car at points or something,
I guess it's a good thing I don't remember a ton about the trip. There's sort of flash points that I remember. I remember being stuffed into a hotel room with many other people, and more to mention, I don't remember how sleeping arrangements were. I just remember a lot of people in our room always when we were there. I remember playing against the games against McGill were great. They were all great games just because it was fun to be playing baseball. I remember Jason being mightily pissed off at us for being downtown past curfew, and us, a few of us, running back to the car to try to make it home, but it was too late. We were past the curfew that we were supposed to be back at the hotel. So again, just more general memories of just enjoying it and everybody sort of really, really enjoying themselves, being part of it, and not too many, aside from those little snapshots, as many specifics as I'd like to have,
Well, temptations are many in downtown Montreal at night. That's all I've got to say. And it's a fun place to go, right? So, I'm pretty sure you guys obviously shocked Durham, so it didn't affect you too badly, I would say.
Yeah.
Was it cold, or did you guys have good weather? When we went the following year, it was freezing cold.
Yeah, no, it was cold. It was I remember the games, and the sunny days kind of stand out, but in the games in Montreal were kind of chilly and gray, like you'd expect in sort of late September, early October in Montreal. So it was definitely sleeves, and happy to have the batting gloves on to help keep warm,
Yeah, absolutely. So Trevor, what comes next for you? Obviously you play, and then you're probably narrowing in on making your next step. So all roads lead to Dalhousie. How did you come to that decision? And tell me about the impact of Dalhousie on your life.
So the decision to go to Dell really had a lot to do with the decision to stay home for undergrad. I certainly had realized by the time I finished at McMaster that going away to continue school was something that I absolutely needed to and wanted to do. And how I got to Dalhousie, I had applied to some Ontario schools. I applied to UBC, to University of Alberta, University of Calgary. And the reason for Dalhousie, strangely enough, was that I went to a kind of a fair that all the law schools put on here in Toronto. And the person who was at the Dalhousie table, just the nicest person I'd ever met. You know, they were so kind and answering all the questions I had, that I thought, well, this has got to be a great place to go to school. And I had taken a vacation out to Nova Scotia as a kid and just really enjoyed being around the ocean. So it was essentially those two things. And it turned out that it's true. It is great living by the ocean, and everybody from Atlantic Canada is really nice, as it turns out. So all those, it turned out to be a great decision. I had a great time living in Halifax for 3 years. I met my wife in my third year there. She was at St. Mary's University, and when I was at Dow. She's from Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland. So that opened up a whole other new wonderful place that I got to experience and have been traveling to for the last 25, 26 years. It ended up with me getting a job here back here in Toronto as a summer student from Dow, and I'm still with the same law firm that I was a summer student with back in 1997. So everything that's happened to me since I left McMaster has been really a result of making that good decision to go out to Halifax.
Was it difficult to convince your wife to come to Toronto? She had obviously been an East Coast girl, and you're in Halifax, which is not Newfoundland either. Was it difficult to convince her did she join you at first, or was she staying out east for a little while you were working away?
I had the good fortune of her brother living here at the time. So there was a family connection that made it a little easier for her to come to Toronto. And then at the time there still is quite a large community of Newfoundlanders who live here of our age. So that actually made it a little easier, and she had a job to come to here in Toronto as well. But a very difficult move for both of us because obviously St. John's is nothing like Toronto, and Hamilton's not even anything like Toronto, as you know. So the first few years living here, it was we weren't sure that this was the place for us and that we were going to stay, and actually ended up going back to Halifax for a couple of weeks to see if we were going to move back. But by that point, we had both kind of settled into our careers here, and we decided to put that to rest. And within a year, bought a house here in Toronto and had our oldest son. So and we've been settled here ever since.
Yeah, and Toronto, is shocking at first, but it takes on a totally different pitch and scale when you have time to grow into it's really a city of neighborhoods. And when you get engrossed in your neighborhood, you start to discover some of the charm of the city. It can be a little bit off-putting, I think, at first, because it seems big and overwhelming, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of charm to it. At times it can feel corporate and cold, but yeah. I've really come to appreciate that it's about the more ground level organic portions of neighborhoods that can make Toronto a special place and a good place to raise kids and a family. But at first it's not evident, right? It's not as evident as it would be in a Halifax or certainly a St. John's, or
Yeah, it's not a warm hug when you arrive by any means here in Toronto. So, but you're right. We've come to embrace it, and certainly, our kids have had great opportunities as a result of living here, and we still have a really strong connection to Newfoundland. Go back often, and my kids really enjoy getting to see their grandparents. My wife comes from a pretty large family there. We're relatively small here, but there's a big family back in Newfoundland who's always happy to see them.
That's amazing. And so you obviously at some point make the decision that you have children and you're going to coach. What kind of a coach do you think
Yeah.
you are? Are you a Jason Gwindon type coach, a Billy Newton type coach? Are you your own, more kind of laid back in
Yeah,
your approach?
yeah, I'm not sure I'm either of those. I'm probably somewhere between Billy and Jason, and I'd say you're right in saying that they may be at the opposite ends of the scale on the intensity scale. I think starting coaching kids at a young age, I was always and I just finished last fall, but most concerned not with winning and losing as much as just development, and just wanting to ensure that they learned how to play the game the right way. As a community baseball organization, community coach, preparing those who want to go on to the next level. But as a couple of years in, we were coaching the AAA team, so then winning became a little bit more of a priority, and we expect a bit more out of the players. And it was just always year over year a good core group of kids, most of whom have now gone on to private programs. Now that they're all in their 15th season, and are doing well. So I've taken that opportunity to step back. I'm still on the board of Leaside Baseball. That's where I coached my younger son up until last fall, and it's just a great community organization. It's one of those neighborhoods that you described, and a lot of great baseball players come out of it, and a lot of great people great baseball players just go on to become great people coming out of that organization. Zach Eady, for example.
Hey, yeah,
In
well,
Purdue.
I think the my memories of Leaside are obviously playing at Talbot Park, which I can proudly
Yeah.
say I never lost a game at Talbot Park, even though I used to think, why does everyone rave about this park? There's no fence in right, and if it hits that cart
Yeah.
path, it's going to roll forever, and it's got that that kind of cheap version of the Green Monster, and I've seen so many people hit the ball over it, and then it would kill the cars that were going by on Eglinton, right? Like it was just atrocious.
Still
And
does. Yeah.
I had a teammate who, before it's now been torn down, but there was a Pharma Plus, I think, where it was some sort of Rexall drugstore across the road, and he hit one on the roof there. So that's a shot. That's over the road, and
Oh,
they're
yeah.
but interesting place to play a game. And there used to be a McDonald's on the corner, so we would always try to sneak stuff from McDonald's behind our coach's back. It's just Leaside is one of those iconic um, Toronto locations, right? There's High Park and Christie Pitts, and there's
Yeah.
Leaside, and no, that's great. Um, Trevor, so clearly you're highly invested in your kids' baseball careers. Obviously, if your older son's going to a big D1 program, what was that process like? And um, was it hard not to really roll up the sleeves and get involved and try to be uber involved, or you just let your son make his own decisions there?
Yeah. It wasn't hard to be involved. It's being involved in the right way was the challenge, and being supportive and not getting in the way. But he played at Leaside up until his end of his 14U season, then went to the Ontario Blue Jays out in Mississauga, and really we had no sense that any of what eventually ended up happening to him in terms of his development and his progress was going to happen until he got there and got in the hands of much more professional coaching, experienced coaching with connections to the U.S. and the opportunity to go play in events in the U.S. that he really started to take off. And then it all happened very quickly for him. In his 16U season, he played a series of tournaments in the U.S., including an event called the Future Games down in Atlanta. And then it was just a flood of these offers that came in after, and we went and did some official visits and things like that. And then he made his decision to go to Florida after that. But all I really did with him, and now with my younger son, who just started this year at the Ontario Blue Jays, now is I throw BP and I hit fungos. And my rule is if they want to go out and do it, I'll never say no. So, if I can find a tunnel that we can rent at 10 o'clock at night and they want to hit, then I'm there to do that for them, and then leave it in the hands of the pros, their coaches, to do the heavy lift. But that's the way. And also, I mean, like all of us, chaperoning the games, and my older son's got the opportunity last year to play in some really cool places. So it's not a driving trip, it's a flight, but that's been an experience now where he's giving me experiences that I wouldn't otherwise have, that because of where he's progressed to so far. And it's great seeing my younger son kind of follow along the path that my older son followed through the Ontario Blue Jays, and wanting to do all the things that he's doing.
Well, it doesn't hurt that you're going to warm places. At the end of the day, if it was to go to Montreal in October again to freeze your butt off, you might be like, kid, law is calling your name. It's funny that way. Let's pivot and talk a little bit about employment law, because that is very relevant these days, obviously, with economic shocks that have been really pretty prevalent since COVID. And I'm sure that you've had to deal with a lot of different things tied to, it's just been very difficult for companies and corporations to navigate. A couple things, I think, is a great deal of amount of stress leave and mental health and the return to work in the office. That's led to a lot of friction between employee groups and companies. And, I think additionally, there's just a constant economic pressure on corporations for profit line with high interest rates. So there's a need for some systematic layoffs, and that's hard to do. They put in more protections, and there's now that the worker protection legislation that, bosses can't be phoning and emailing their employees after 5 o'clock, and a few of these kinds of things. Tell me a little bit about professionally how busy it's been for you for the last few years, and has it been something you feel that's been evolving and getting more, because we hear more about employment law now than we ever did?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, I was concerned as to whether, what my practice would look like, what employment law and what our law firm generally would look like once it struck, and nobody really knew what was going to happen. But, the first part of the pandemic was spent just really giving advice about, how to manage a workforce remotely, what structures need to be set up in order to have that actually work. And then, people kind of settled in and we got through the pandemic. We also had the supply chain issues and many industries, including some where I have clients like hospitality, where people just couldn't work from home. They just went home and they received government benefits. So it was a huge 180 in terms of how I practice day to day, how employers manage their employees day to day. And you're quite right. On the as we're coming out of the pandemic, it feels over, but it's not really over because work has changed. People have changed. They've become accustomed to having either a work from home arrangement. They've changed their lives around that kind of a thing, or a hybrid, and they're chafing in some cases at the requirement to come back to work. And then we have the kind of double whammy of inflation, where wage rates aren't keeping up to the cost of living. And doing what I do, that in union negotiations, that's become the biggest, one of the biggest issues, aside from job security, that people are most concerned about in trying to ensure that their dollar a few years ago is still the same as their dollar today. So that's been sort of the biggest change in terms of the way my practice works. Certainly in the way collective bargaining works, it's become much more contentious as a result of this desire to have wage rates that are keeping pace with the cost of living, where employers are also seeing their margins being kind of squeezed through their own rising costs and things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, people are struggling in many cases. Their mental health issues are, the most common leave of absence that I'm seeing are things of that nature, not back injuries or shoulders or things of that nature. It's the disability that's tougher to see, when someone's just suffering. So that's certainly something I'm seeing.
Yeah, Trevor, take us, if you feel comfortable doing it, what makes for a contentious labor negotiation? I mean, is it, I think we all have these images of people sitting across from each other on a big boardroom table and pounding their fists at each other. But sometimes it can just be an inflexibility or they're just so rigid in their position. What as a lawyer do you feel is a contentious negotiation?
So there is some of that. I mean, what I always tell our clients is that we are going to get a deal. No matter, we may have to take a strike. We probably won't. There may be a lockout, but at some point we're going to get a deal. So even on the worst day of bargaining, where it seems as though a deal is not within reach, there's always going to be a deal at some point. So I don't tend to get too emotionally invested or upset if things don't seem to be going well, because I'm going to see it through to the end. The most contentious bargaining is one where there is a lack of discussion, really. If you're just passing proposals and speaking past one another, the chances of getting a deal done are pretty slim. There has to be at some point. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and how how do you deal with that? Do you just exercise an inordinate amount of patience, or you go out and put a little extra mustard on the BP that you're throwing to your kids that day? Like, how do you deal with the stress of this?
Yeah, well, there are certainly stressful days, difficult days. I try to keep my composure. There's times where the appropriate thing isn't to keep your composure. It's to demonstrate that you're not happy with what the other side's saying or how they're approaching things. But again, I always keep in the back of my mind, even if our client's not feeling it, even if the other side's not feeling it, that everybody's common goal here is to get a deal done. And we will, at some point, get a deal done one way or the other, and just keep driving toward it.
It's hard being an optimistic person in life sometimes, but
you have to be. I mean, if I was pessimistic, there's always times when our clients are pessimistic, or where they find the process difficult, because I get paid to do this job every day, and it's what I've elected to do. When everybody else is at the table, they're taking away from their job. That they're not getting paid to bargain. When their bargaining's done, they have to go do their day-to-day job. So they get somewhat frustrated at times by being there and not seeing it go as well or as quickly as they'd like. Knowing that they have their day jobs to do when they're not part of their company's bargaining committee. So that's a little different for them than it is for me as well. So my hope, my job is to keep them positive when they're not feeling it.
That's a very good. No, it's a very good coaching quality, though. So when the score is 12-0, come on, we can still win. It's great from that perspective. Trevor, I'm going to pivot again because I think it's interesting. You're halfway towards being an empty nester, essentially. And aside from flying to a variety of very warm southern U.S. locations to watch baseball games, you and your wife have any priorities you want to tackle after the kids are out of the house and at least on their educational journey?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned to you, most of our summers since baseball started for my older son have been spent around the baseball diamond, which has been great. And I will miss every moment of it if I no longer have to go to a baseball diamond to see them play. But that means we've not done a lot of travel as a family to just go on a vacation, and certainly as a couple, not done a lot of travel outside of baseball destinations. So that's one thing that I think as the boys get older and as they, my younger son, once he's moved away in a few years from now, that I think we'd certainly want to focus on a little bit more.
Yeah, I think one of the pleasures of being an empty nester as is kind of reconnecting maybe with some people that you knew 30 years ago, and putting on a uniform to raise a little bit of scholarship funding for a couple of great examples of what a McMaster player should be like and a Brock player should be like. The good thing is we'll all be able to meet Todd and who I know quite well. Todd is a principal in the Aurelia school system, and just a peach of a guy, like the kind of leader that baseball programs like Mac and Brock produce that are shining examples to others. And so that brings me to just one last subject I'd like to tackle, which is, the subject of mentoring. And, whether you had any mentors, whether it's in your law career or in your baseball career, older folks that helped you along, not necessarily a coach sometimes. Some of my mentors were players that were a couple of years older than me when I was playing junior, or I definitely have had a variety of business mentors. Tell me a little bit about the concept of a mentor in your life, because I know in law this is a big thing where the senior partner kind of hang around the firm. They don't really retire in law. They dispense advice and they kind of help bring younger lawyers along.
Yeah, there's it's certainly true in our firm. Mentoring is important. We have a Mentor of the Year award, but there's formal mentors and then there's sort of informal mentors. And I think the informal mentors are the people who you're around, but not because they're assigned to mentor you or they're told to do it, but because they're just people you sort of admire and look up to, and want to emulate their qualities as you get older, and pass those on to others and pay that forward. So certainly, growing up, I mentioned one of my coaches when I was younger. I wouldn't say you don't really, when you're 10, think of someone like that as a mentor, but that's where it kind of sneaks up on you, But there are people, certain teachers in high school, not a lot, and that's why mentors are kind of so exceptional and so memorable, because as you're growing up, they are kind of few and far between, the people who really kind of inspire you to do something, or kind of are carry themselves in the way that you want to emulate. So I certainly have had that, and I mentioned that concept of just being a good team player and a good teammate from a young age, and I think that's that's something that I would never have thought of at the time as mentorship, but certainly a good quality that was instilled relatively early on. And I think that kind of person is the person who, even outside of baseball, just in my law career, that I've been most interested in kind of seeing how they work. And not the person who was formally assigned as a mentor, but just the people who I work with closely, whose style, whose approach to people and to the files we work on is similar to mine, and the kind of person, kind of lawyer I want to be.
Yeah, I had a I work in the advertising industry, and had a gentleman that worked for me actually named Randy McCabe, who is kind of this legendary advertising executive. And Randy was quite a bit older than me. He's getting near an 80 now, and but I just observed his habits. He always came impeccably dressed. He was always on time for his meetings. He always was smiling, and liked to, use humor as his way of disarming the fact that you're asking someone for $500,000 to promote, a Sears sale, like that kind of thing. And, he never took it too seriously, which, I think allowed Randy to have a certain joy about his day. And, I read a book, a really impactful book in my life that talks about the joy is in the work. And when you talk about going out with your sons and throwing and hitting fungos and throwing BP, if you take joy in the work, the game part of it, the competition part of it, that comes easy. And that's a euphoric high after that, because, if you take joy in taking 100 swings, or as Daryl Kemp from Brock said, go take 100 dry cuts in 15 minutes and get back to me. If you can enjoy those things in the mundane, then you're really set up well for life, because there are days in your career or on a baseball team where you're doing things that are more robotic in nature and systematic, but learning to enjoy them and embrace them is really an important lesson in life. Trevor, what, are you still competitive? Like, this is really important to frame, because if you're still throwing BP at that extent, you're actively involved in coaching, I have to determine whether I have to send, a shadowy figure with a steel bar to hit you across the leg, Tanya Harding style here. Are you competitive and looking forward to getting on a field to play one more time?
I am competitive, and unfortunately, I don't think my body is as competitive as my mind still might be. But I am really looking forward to getting on a field with a uniform on one more time, and being the guy who's taking the swings, not the one who's...
Yeah, when you got a team of 25 first basemen and left fielders, that's probably what we're both going to be dealing with. It'll be like, who's going to play center and who's going to play short and who's going to catch? Like, catching is, they'll have to have that stool behind home plate so the catcher could sit on it. But, no, it's exciting. And listen, I really thank you for today. I know the time is a billable hour in your world, so I really appreciate it, and look forward to keeping track of how your son does in Florida. Like, I think that's a big D1 school, and I think you'll find that if Coach McRae is at our reunion in September, he coaches a D1 William and Mary and plays against teams like Virginia. He just played Virginia and Duke and that kind of stuff. Very well connected coach, but probably very fascinating to talk to him about the Florida program and how he views Canadians in the U.S., because he brings a lot of them down, and so exciting times.
Yeah, one of my son's teammates is at William and Mary right now. He's in his freshman year.
Oh my goodness! So he's playing for Coach McRae. Well, Coach McRae is a certain form of hardcore, man. I got lots of stories about Coach Mike McRae, but all of them lead to a great result because, if you embrace what he's trying to do, I've always said that he's a guy that strips away the good or the very good and helps expose you to the level that is excellent. And sometimes you got to understand that's what coaches are doing. They're not persecuting you. They're not poking you in the chest. They're trying to get the best out of you. And he sees things that other people don't. And I think that's high-level coaches are really good at that. And, you played in an era where that was more about discovering it yourself, and there was not a lot of people to say, hey, you got an extra gear there. If you adjust this, you're going to be splitting that gap, one more time out of 10 at bats. It's just a new time, and I'm excited for your son's friend, and excited that you might get a chance to have someone who can give you an alternate perspective on what's going on in Florida. So,
yeah, for sure.
I'll be expecting a royalty when your son's in the major leagues, just because we had this discussion. So, thanks a lot, Trevor, and have a great night.
Mike. It was great. Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
All right.